Welcome to episode 7 of season 2 of the Filmmaker Film Watcher podcast. I'm filmmaker Richard Di Gregorio.
And I am film watcher Greg Ralph.
This is our What's Up documentary episode.
So we're going to be looking at 3 documentaries.
That's right.
The first of which is 2016's documentary Wiener.
And then we're going to look at 1995 Mohsen Makhmalbaf documentary called Salam Cinema.
And we're going to wrap things up with a film from 2012 called Stories We Tell by Canadian filmmaker Sarah Polley.
So, Greg, if you can just bring us in with the first documentary, Wiener.
So Wiener made in 2016. So in 2011, Anthony Weiner had been a US Democrat congressman for 12 years, with never less than 59% of the vote. He was one half of a golden political power couple, married for 2 years to Huma Abedin, who was cited as Hillary Clinton's right hand, and in fact the couple had been married by Bill Clinton. Then scandal broke when Weiner accidentally tweeted a link to a sexually revealing photo of himself, when he meant to send it directly to someone other than his wife. Eventually, after trying to bluster it out, he resigned from Congress. 2 years later, he's a father and running for New York mayor on a platform of everyone deserves a second chance. As part of this, he agrees to a fly-on-the-wall documentary about his comeback. 7 weeks out from the election, Weiner has captured the polls. But then a second scandal breaks, when it's revealed that he has continued his unfortunate sexting under the colourful name of Carlos Danger. But the photos are more explicit this time, because Anthony's not wearing his undies. In this 2016 documentary, we watch as Weiner tries to work this new scandal every which way, from bluster and spin, and public confessional, through to confrontation of his critics. For whatever reasons, legal or egotistical, the cameras keep rolling as we witness the behaviour of different media players when they scent blood, and the impact of the scandal on the people around him, not least on his increasingly unhappy wife, Huma, who has her own career to consider. The result is a portrait of addiction, presented as a potent mix of screwball comedy and Shakespearean tragedy. So, Ricardo, what did you make of this film?
Oh, what a character, really. What a character he is. Look, I had no idea what to expect from this film.
Did you know the story before?
No. See, I knew Anthony Weiner was involved in a sex scandal of some sort, but didn't know the finer details of the story. When I was in New York in October last year, just right before the election, he was in the spotlight for allegedly sexting with a 15-year-old girl at the time, and that was derailing Hillary's campaign.
Yep.
Okay, and it was like a little bit of distraction from all of the email scandal that was going on at the same time, but it was derailing her campaign at the same time.
Yep.
It was quite big news. I didn't know that much of it. So ultimately, when you said you wanted to do the Weiner documentary...
Because I had seen this before recently.
I haven't been that interested in his story. I haven't been that interested in it. So I didn't know what to make of it until I watched it.
And then?
I think it's a riveting documentary. It really is. I think being able to view and show the madness of politics and the political comeback and the downfall... I was riveted.
And the media circus.
And the media circus. I was riveted by this. I really was. And the character. You know, look, first and foremost, I think it plays both sides here. You go between thinking, what an idiot, right?
Oh, but you sit there thinking, why?
Yeah. But then on the other hand, there's this is before the 15-year-old sex scandal happened. This is from the first one. I think... From when the first one happened, you're just thinking, God, he's really harshly done by here. He is being crucified.
During the Congress one.
Yeah.
Yep.
He is being crucified here for doing a sexting to... He didn't sleep with the woman. It's in his personal life, yet it overshadowed everything about him.
And as the documentary makes clear from the very first moment, part of the problem is his surname. You know, Wiener, which is a sausage, which has the obvious connotations.
It's actually quite perfect.
Yeah, well, for everyone, for him, yeah.
For him, yeah, that's right. But I really feel like he is harshly done by, because I think it does overshadow everything. I mean, it wasn't illegal what he did. And I think people have done much worse. And I think people get on their moral high horse and go, you know, well, he did this, you know, I would never do that. It's like nobody does anything wrong. And people just get onto their moral high ground. And I think he was, at that point, yes, yeah, I could feel like he was harshly done by. But in saying that, when it happens again...
He learned nothing.
And he learns nothing. And you go... And he's bought Huma, who you can just tell is so... Just mortified and embarrassed by this whole situation. And she's a smart woman. You know, she's a smart, intelligent, classy woman being dragged into this smutty world here. And I really felt sorry. You could see in her face, in her expression, in her arms, she's so closed off. I feel really sorry for her. And then, like, amazingly, that this happens and it derails his campaign massively. I mean, he gets 4.93% of the vote or something. And then when he starts to, yell at voters and he starts losing it, really. He starts losing it. Because it gets very frustrating for him. And then, in 2016, he comes out with another one where he sexted a 15-year-old girl. I mean, I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back for Huma.
Maybe that was a PR stunt because the film came out. Maybe he was just trying to help.
I don't know.
The reason that when we talked about doing documentaries, the reason this one came to mind is I'd only seen it like 2-3 months prior, and it really encapsulated for me one of the problems I have with something like a documentary. And documentaries are not my go-to genre. And I know I alluded to documentaries a little bit earlier in this season when we were talking about Dancer in the Dark.
Yeah.
And I said Lars von Trier, is his name?
Yes.
Of course it's his name, was trying to do a documentary style, and then it kind of falls apart when you're watching the murder, because you would never see that happen.
Yeah.
Well, the way that Huma was kind of almost pinned under the camera, like one of those butterflies on a pin, where obviously it seemed to me they couldn't get out of making the documentary. They had to let the cameras roll. Twice in the film you see them say, "Can you leave us alone for a bit?" So there's a bit of give and take there.
There was.
But they really couldn't stop. And so he's doing what he's doing, and, it's a totally self-inflicted wound. But she's on the ride, whether she likes it or not. And I felt so sorry, and then I felt very uncomfortable as a voyeur.
Yeah.
I'm watching this woman's life unravel. I'm watching the misery. This is not a fictional story. This is not a reenactment of someone's story, some years later. As I critiqued a couple of episodes ago with Chopper, the death of characters. I'm watching the real person having a terrible time, and I feel really uncomfortable and conflicted. And I think that's one of the interesting things about documentary. They're real people, and you watch it in real time.
There's that one moment when she's just getting a cup of tea or something.
Headache tablets.
She's getting headache. And then he says, the cameraman or the documentarian says, "How's it all feeling?" or whatever he says there. And she says, "It's like living a nightmare." And I think that is exactly what her face shows through the whole documentary. Up until when the second sex scandal happens during, it was 7 weeks out or
7 weeks out
from the campaign, from the election, she's fine and she's really supporting him. And I think she's really fully into the...
She goes and defends him.
She goes and defends him. And that's why I feel so sorry for her. She's just put herself out there completely for him, to support him, to be there for him, and then for it to happen again. There's a moment at the very, sort of towards the end of the movie as well, when it's on election day, it's election day. It was before the election day when he's doing an ad for, and he says, maybe you just want to leave 2 minutes after me, or...
We don't want people to think we're married.
We don't want people,
know things are not good.
Yes, that's right.
But she was the central example of someone who's been filmed in something which is just not good and can't get out from under it, the camera. But there were other characters. The woman who was his press secretary, I think.
Oh, yes.
Who's sitting in the car.
The blonde-haired girl,
laughing at his Rodney Dangerfield jokes, which to me, that's not my style of humour, but was just not funny. But she's laughing, and I don't know if she was genuinely amused or pleasing the boss or just letting off some stress. But I thought, you poor person, you're caught up in this.
She is.
We're now watching your career almost fall apart because you're shackled to this guy.
That's right.
One of the most interesting moments for me in the film is when he's in his office and there's two other people there, neither the press secretary, I think, or his wife, but he's talking to the people who are running his focus groups or his campaign advertising, and they basically say to him, "You have no chance of winning.
Yes.
You should stop now, or you should just go through this as just proving you get through, but basically without us."
Yeah.
And it was a really brutal moment and a bit of an insight to how that world works. But so there were interesting things, but it's a fascinating story. And I have to say, public confessional, the first time I watched it was a bit of a sense of, Schadenfreude, watching this guy go through this situation of his own making.
I think he's a definite narcissist. I mean,
Well, and I can't quite work him out because he seems to be self-aware when he talks about himself in those one-on-one interviews interspersed through the film. And other times he seems to have no idea. He has no idea. He's completely destroyed his credibility. He thinks he still has it.
There's an amazing...
He just doesn't seem to know.
No, there's an amazing moment. And this is where, like, when he's talking to one of a news anchor and Lawrence or something, and... he really loses it in that interview because the news anchor says, "What is wrong with you?"
Yes,
right, and he keeps saying that, and it angers and makes him, get quite upset in that interview, and it's beautifully filmed actually because you're watching the news report as people are watching it
with the backdrop of the
city, and then you're watching it from side stage in a lonely studio,
talking to no one that you can see, with a green screen behind him.
That's right. Yeah. And it seems like here he is talking and putting himself out there to the world or to so many people, and yet he's alone.
He's in his confrontational mode at that
stage. That's right, and he's just alone in this studio of quietness. It's beautifully done.
Well, it is, and when I say Shakespearean tragedy, and that might be a little bit overblown, but the tragedy is for some of the people around him, but also that, and I don't know much about the man himself, but what they show of him as a US congressman back in 2011, and what they show in the early parts of his campaign trail, it sounds like a man who is really trying to achieve some good. So in 2011, he's arguing passionately against a bill that's going to disenfranchise the rescuers from 9/11 in America, which is a seminal event in modern history.
Yes.
He's really arguing for them. In the New York mayor campaign, he's arguing for social housing.
That's right.
And so I watch it as someone who doesn't belong to the system at all, but recognises elements of it, and thinking, he might actually be someone who could do good within that realm, but he just self-sabotages repeatedly and doesn't understand that.
I think the same way. I think he could have been a fantastic politician, and the passion. That's why I think it's ridiculous. It really is, because he's someone who can do it. He has got a good manner. That's why he became quite popular before all this happened.
He's obviously charming.
Yeah,
face to face.
Yeah, and in fact, people are drawn to him.
Yes,
but how you could not understand that what first got you into strife, and now you're making your comeback. You're ahead in the polls.
Massively. And
how you can just fall so badly and just not learn from that is... I just don't understand it. I think I don't understand it. Yes, you talked about an addiction earlier, and I think it has to be.
And it's a compelling portrait that you see of the man in that world. The other part of it I found interesting, and maybe particularly second time around, was the media elements around it. So the man you mentioned in that lonely interview was someone who spoke very directly. You've got a problem, what's wrong with you? But there were other things that were circus-like.
Yeah.
So you had or actually deeply offensive. So you had him walking down the street, and there's the female reporter saying to him, "Do you think your wife will choose to stay with you over helping Hillary Clinton get elected?" I'm thinking, where do you get off asking this question? How do you have the right to ask that?
Yeah.
But there was also the comedy of election night, where Weiner has lost. He knows he's lost. He's got to turn up to the party. And make the concession speech.
And Howard Stern sends the girl who is just doing this for some...
The one who came out with the story of what he sent to her.
That's right. He's just coming out and doing this for fame. As if she's the morally right one. I'm sitting there going...
Codename Pineapple.
Codename Pineapple. I'm just thinking to myself, hang on a minute. You were engaging in this too, and yet you think you've got an upper hand, and you're actually...
No, I don't think she saw it morally, even though she was saying it. She was riding her 15 minutes of fame.
Of course she was, yeah.
But you had this, as I say, almost screwball scenario where they know she's there. There's no way they want to have him filmed in her proximity.
No.
So they go for the McDonald's solution, where they go sideways through the McDonald's store into the hotel, and she's chasing after them with the cameraman, right. And he's got his entourage kind of blocking her, and she's saying, "Are you serious? Are you serious?" Yes. And I'm thinking, "Are you serious?
Are you serious?" Exactly.
Like that was bizarre, seriously bizarre.
Actually, the moment just before all that happened, when he just said, "Who might go home," he was going to just do it by himself. I just went, oh, well, that was a good thing for him to do.
I don't know if he had a lot of choice. I don't know if she would have gone.
No. She looked like she was straining. She had her hands around her waist as if, I just do not want to be here with you at all.
Yeah, and the filmmakers make a point, almost heavy-handedly, no pun intended, of watching how she's just hugging herself so tightly a couple of times.
So defensive.
I mean, it's a compelling portrait. It's eye-opening, but it just leaves me uncomfortable that I'm spying on this developing unhappiness. So what would you give it, score-wise?
Oh, look, you know what? I wasn't that taken with the subject matter, first and foremost. I just didn't know what to expect from it. I think it was the last thing I watched. So, but I found it really riveting. I found the documentary, the documentarians, I think they would have approached Anthony Weiner at the very beginning. We are going to be a fly on the wall.
Well, he comments on that.
He does. And then suddenly when they start entering and they start asking questions and they start getting uncomfortable about that, I think Huma does, and she sort of always wants to stand back from it.
Yeah.
And then he does. He starts feeling uncomfortable, unless he's in that interview.
Well, to a point,
does.
yeah.
But in terms of a score, I'm going to give this a 7. Was well made, and it's a good story. I really enjoyed it.
See, I'm also giving it a 7, but for slightly different reasons. I think it's a fascinating subject, but as a film, I think the filmmakers were just incredibly lucky. So they found themselves in this situation that was just, amazing. But I felt like they rode the coattails of it. Sometimes there were some things I felt were heavy-handed, a few musical choices that were a bit just not terribly subtle. And if they hadn't had that situation that they landed in rather than, I think, probably planned to be in, I don't know that they would have had much of a film. They were just damned lucky.
They were very lucky.
So it's not a great documentary. It's a very interesting story, but as film, I'm putting it at 7. Okay, so let's talk about our second documentary. Ricardo, tell us about Salam Cinema.
Okay, Salam Cinema. Mohsen Makhmalbaf is a famous director in Iran, and this film, Salam Cinema, also known as Hello Cinema, is a tribute to the art of cinema on its 100th anniversary, 1995. After putting up an ad for an open casting call for his movie in a newspaper, thousands of people turned up and a riot ensued. Not everybody could be in the picture, but everybody wanted a chance to be in it. And it's really amazing to watch these scenes and what people will do for an opportunity to be in the movies. And it sets the tone for the rest of the film, exploring people's love and passion for the medium, while they audition for their prospective film roles in the movie. And it's amazing that people seem to talk and sprout their love for film and cinema, but really see it as a ticket to a better, more prosperous life, such as the woman who wants Makhmalbaf to hire her for a film so she can get a visa to be with her boyfriend who's in another country. This film uses film to comment on film, which I think is really clever. It's about how cinema affects the lives of people, and this film relates to everyone, everywhere, not just Iran. Greg?
I didn't care for this film.
Oh, well, okay.
It passed me by. Now, it got off to a bad start.
Well, okay.
It got off to a bad start because...
I'll let you talk.
Yeah, maybe you should. So the opening scene where they ask for 1,000 people and 5,000 turn up, and the place is jam-packed with people.
It is. It's quite...
And it's not bedlam, it's chaos. And I didn't have what I think is meant to be the response to it. I read something online when I was trying to make sense of this film that scene is electrifying. I don't find it electrifying. I find it frightening. Now, a bit of disclosure here. Back in my early adulthood, I was in India and I got caught up in a crowd a bit like this, not as full on, but a bit like this, which was quite a frightening experience. And so when I see that on film, I'm in at least a state of apprehension. And this film, as you say, came out in 1995. So this is 6 years after the Hillsborough Stadium disaster. So I'm watching, when they open the gates, there's all the bedlam beforehand. You see the director in the middle of the crowd with all these audition forms.
That's right.
And he looks completely overwhelmed by the situation.
Absolutely.
So it's just not under control. Then they open the gates and these people just pour through the gates. The gates themselves are buckling on the sides. People are saying, stop, you're killing them.
That's
But
right.
you see a guy being carried away who's
few
passed
people
out.
being carried away.
And so I'm starting the film, as audience, I'm starting the film feeling apprehensive, feeling very uncomfortable, that I'm watching, a bit like Huma in Weena, I'm watching something which has the potential to really be full-on tragedy, and yet the cameras keep rolling. I felt really uncomfortable about that. So before we even get into what looked like a gymnasium or a hall where they're doing all the audition interviews, I'm not liking this film already. Now, this film goes for an hour and a quarter. It's quite a short film.
It's a short film, yeah.
I got bored. I imagine this film talks a lot more to you because you are someone who, as an actor, has auditioned a number of times. I think we spoke about this when we discussed La La Land. This is a foreign land to me. I felt it was an eye-opener to me in terms of the power of the director, the way I thought he was playing with these people. I found him cruel. I found him a bit of a bully at times. The bits I found most interesting were when people stood up to him. So when people said, I'm not interested in being an action film, or I'm not interested in playing a mother, and they weren't necessarily thinking of themselves as challenging his power, but it's what they were doing. Those little moments for me were quite interesting. But when he's getting people walking in and out, you can have the part, you can't have the part, I'm kind of like, oh, please.
No, okay. His approach.
Yep.
It is sort of dictator-like, okay, in terms of the director. But he's right, okay? Just loving cinema is not enough to think you can just be in the cinema, okay? It's the age-old thing whereby people think it's easy, okay? People think acting is easy. It's not, okay? I love the way he tests people in this. Okay, in acting school, you're always finding yourself, challenging yourself emotionally, finding the things that trouble you, make you laugh, make you cry, finding those feelings inside you that you want to hide and suppress, and you let them out. Okay, that's what you do in acting school. As an actor, he's right. You're opening the door to yourself and allowing people in. Okay, and it doesn't matter what genre we're talking about either. It could be drama, it could be comedy, it could be anything there. Okay, but you're allowing yourself to be put out there. Okay, and the film almost delves into psychological experimentation there, but I think he's right there. He's right to push these people. He's right to do this because this is what it's like to be an actor. It's not easy. It's not everybody, can be in the cinema just because they want to be in the cinema.
Oh, I get that. And there were people who quite obviously had no idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So and he's right to test them.
Well, he's right to test them, but not to keep saying to them, you failed. To say to them in front of their children, you failed. Your children have failed. You're not in this film. You can do that in a better way. Like, I get it. There's 5,000 people. I'm not even sure how clearly an idea he had in his head of what this film might be. But he's got a lot of people that he needs to sort through. I get that. I get that there are people who are turning up who've got no idea, and you might possibly have them standing against a wall in a crowd scene kind of thing. But they have no idea how to act. But the way he goes about it, and the repetition of what he was doing, I was both unimpressed and bored.
Now, keep in mind, though, this is made way before, X Factor, The Voice, or those sort of audition style shows, which we've come to know now. Social media didn't exist. Even mobile phones were sparse at the time. I think in 1995.
They were.
And I think the term mobile wanker was still,
You're really trying to kill our family rating, aren't you?
It was a term that existed back then, but. Nowadays, it's really easy to see that, when people want fame, you look at YouTube, you look at all those social media platforms and how people want to become famous. But what this shows is that you can take that away, but people still want that, have that longing to be famous, to be in films, and again, just to be prosperous and rich. And I think the notion that cinema is just there for that to some people, I sort of think he's right.
Ricardo, you don't love your partner enough because you can't cry and command. He's obnoxious.
No, he's not. I don't think that's him. I think he's playing them, and I think he's playing the situation. Look, I stumbled on this movie. I was watching I taped on VHS a documentary on the Polish director Krzysztof Kieślowski, who was famous for the Three Colours trilogy, Three Colours Blue, White and Red. It was a documentary on him called I'm So-So. I obviously let it tape longer than that show, and Salam Cinema came up and I watched it, and honestly, Greg, I am riveted to this every time I watch it. I love this film. I think it's a really good psychological look at passion for cinema and what people think about cinema and him questioning people's love for it. I think it's wonderful.
I admire the intent that you just described. I don't like the execution. I don't like the way he behaves. And I have to say, for him and also for a number of the auditionees, is that a word? I was never quite sure, is this really them or are they putting something on? So you're suggesting that maybe he was putting it on in terms of his style for this auditioning, winnowing process.
Yeah.
Some of the auditionees, some of the women, in fact, I was never quite sure, is this a true story about the boyfriend overseas or about the parents and what they were hoping? Or is this them trying an angle on to get apart? I don't know how you tell that apart. I think maybe a more interesting movie might have been to actually take these people aside and talk to them about why they were there. I would have found it more intriguing, but the whole process and the fact it went over and over and over again, and those two women who were kind of the mainstay of the latter part of the film, who go in, they come out, the father of the two boys goes in, comes out. Do you want to be humane or do you want to be an actor? You can be an actor as long as you get rid of these other people. I just sort of thought, I had the same two words in mind that you just a moment ago without the word mobile.
No, no,
and that is trying to preserve our family rating.
He's not. He's not. But there's some really great quotes in there, which he says, we come into the world crying, and when we die, others cry for us. It's a lovely quote.
It is, but it doesn't make a film for me. Now, he made another film, I think after this, called A Moment of Innocence.
I haven't seen that.
No, neither have I, but I'm actually more intrigued by that. So, as I understand it, this film is about the fact that he was involved in a demonstration. He ended up stabbing, not killing, but stabbing a policeman. And he goes back many years later to kind of find out what happened to this man and talk to him. I think that would be a more interesting film to me. I didn't like this.
I think he's really showing his passion for cinema here, okay? Seeing through the eyes of the people who love it also and would seem to do anything for it.
We've done this before. We choose films that have some kind of affinity, in this case, through documentaries. And then these other things kind of come through when you watch them, almost back to back. What I found interesting about all three of these documentaries is that all of them called attention to the fact that they were a film. They were not trying to be almost a passive recording of events. So Salam Cinema was the most obvious of these. As you say, right. There's all the film crew around the sides.
That's right.
The loading and unloading of canisters and the instructions he's giving to the actor to go out and bring these people back. And the other two did similar things. So, we saw the filmmakers, we heard them talking to Weiner. You got a sense of the fact this is a film being made much, much more in the Sarah Polley film we're going to talk about. In
the start of this movie, Salam Cinema, you see a lot of the people wanting to audition. One thing I'm really surprised at is that you really don't get to see that many of them in the film.
No, I kind of wondered how it all worked.
Well, I think he got not as much material as what he probably wanted to. He stuck on those two 16-year-old girls for
about a third of the film.
For a third of the film. So I think...
And a fair bit on the young guy pretending to be blind at the
absolutely.
start.
I mean, I thought that was very interesting, actually, because I think he was doing a really good job, and he really held that through the entire process.
I wondered if the director already knew when he walked in, like someone had seen this guy outside or something.
Yeah, I think so.
Because he picked up on it very quickly, and I hadn't. I think you're right, he did a good job.
He did a very good job. I thought he did a very good performance.
Well, if 5,000 people turned up, ballpark figure, maybe 100 of them made it into the film, so 1 in 50. So did they see the other 4,900? Did they see some or all of them, and there wasn't much there?
I loved, one thing I really enjoyed about it was seeing the amount of love for American cinema and Hollywood that some of the people had.
I look like Paul Newman. I don't know what he looks like, but I look like Paul Newman.
I look like Paul Newman. I don't know
and there were moments. So when the camera's going down the line and they're all being asked who they look like, half of them were actors from Iran, I assume, or India.
Right.
Who, I had no idea who they were. But others were saying, and I'm looking at thinking, have you looked in a mirror? Do you know who Arnie Schwarzenegger is?
Schwarzenegger.
You look nothing like Arnie Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
And look, there were moments. The guy who said, "Look, I'm usually cast as a bad guy."
Yes.
And you look at him, you think, "Yeah, you would be cast as a bad guy."
Yes.
And it would be interesting to see you actually play a non-bad guy in a film with a more creative director.
But I like the...
But it didn't make a film for me. I really didn't like the director.
I loved the director.
See, again, you and I are never going to agree on this.
No, definitely not. You see beyond that. You see beyond this. Not just being cruel. When you get into that situation, it's not about being cruel. It's finding the craft and trying to find the art in the situation and pushing people in that artistic sense. It's happened. I've been through it.
Exactly.
And I think it's an important question to ask people.
But
So
there's ways of doing
There's
it.
not. You know, in most NIDA graduates, okay, one of the first things in their first year, they get broken. They say they get broken, emotionally broken. Okay, in order to build themselves, in order to find what you need, in order to fulfill your acting destiny. And I'm sorry, but there's no room for hiding. Okay, on camera, the camera does not lie. It's like the best lie detector ever. When you are in a close-up and you are performing on camera, they will pick up a lie within a second, and people call it bad acting. It's because it's lying, because you're lying to the camera, because you're not believing what you have. And if you are holding back on that, and if you've got anything emotionally from personal life or anything that's holding you back, people will pick up on it.
You and I don't necessarily disagree about the intent. We disagree about the method, and we disagree about whether that is something worth filming.
I don't know how else you would do it. I don't know how else you would do it, and how you would get across to people that is what's needed. I don't know how you can do that without actually doing it. I don't think it's about him being, not a nice person. I think it's completely outside of that. The really interesting bit is when he put the two girls, those two 16-year-old girls, into his position.
Yes.
And I found that really interesting. They were just mimicking him. They couldn't cry, but then they were going, you've got to cry to be an actor. You've got to cry to be an actor. If you're not going to be crying, you're going to get out.
See, I just thought that was a bully making victims into bullies.
No. He was putting them in a situation to say, well, you couldn't do it, so why were you being so cruel? It's not a personal thing. It's about the craft.
I, again, became aware of the genders in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So all the people who are around the sides who were witnessing the activity and or driving it, like the director, they're all men of a certain age in a culture where there are very different gender relations than we might see here in Australia. And I just felt a bit uncomfortable about what's really going on here. I just didn't like the setup. But the second thing I'd say,
but a lot of the females had the voice in here. They had a voice. They were speaking their mind. It wasn't
3 or 4 of them did.
Yeah. Okay.
The two young women. The woman who wanted to talk to him about the boyfriend in America, and maybe 1 or 2 others. So I wouldn't overclaim it.
I don't think there was a complete imbalance there. I think he treated the men exactly the same as he treated the women. I don't think there was an imbalance there whatsoever.
Oh, I think he treated the genders very differently.
No, I don't think so.
With the exception of the blind man and the supposedly blind man and the political prisoner of the 2 sons.
That's right. I think he treated them all the same.
No, he was really grilling the women. And he was putting the men through their paces about, can you sing? Who do you look like? Can you fall over when I shoot you? I don't know what actually happened in the room, but in terms of what we saw in the film, I think there were marked differences. But I wanted to say there was a little moment in the film that really struck me. So we see the crowds, all boiling to get into this space to be in movies. Then we had the supposedly blind man audition. And then we go outside the audition space for a little bit. And there was a moment when there was a guy there, and it was a much quieter scene, and he's handing out the bits of paper, the audition forms, to a group of men.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what that reminded me of? It reminded me of the opening of The Bicycle Thieves.
Oh, yeah, right.
When all the men who are, in poverty are gathered outside this place, all waiting to get this bit of paper that's going to give them their entry to what they want.
Yeah.
Financial security, providing for their family, and so on. There was a bit of an echo there for me.
Yeah,
but overall, no, I didn't like it. So what am I going to give it?
Okay.
Now I'm going to see if you can cry in command, because I'm giving it 4.
Oh, give me a... Oh, no. No.
And in fact, by giving it 4, I feel like I've been a bit harsh last year on Cabaret. Which I gave 4 to.
Really?
I did. I just didn't work for me at all.
I'm giving this a 9, Greg. I'm giving this a 9. Okay? I think it's a gem of a film. It was there. He made it to mark the centenary of film, and I think it's a very good way to do it. A very different way to do it. Not just to celebrate it, but he's actually questioning the people's love for it. 9 out of 10 for me, absolutely.
See, I think this speaks to you. I hope I'm not being patronising or glib here, but I think it speaks to you because you have lived and moved in this world. It made me very glad to be the film watcher.
So the third documentary we're going to be talking about is the 2012 film Stories We Tell. Take it away, Craig.
Sarah Polley is a Canadian actor, writer and director. Her mother Diane had 2 children from her first marriage, and then 2 more from her marriage to English-Canadian actor Michael. Diane was also an actress, And the year before Sarah was born, some years after her siblings, Diane went to Montreal to appear in a play. Michael missed her deeply, leading to a rekindling of their marriage and love life when he went to visit her. 2 days after Sarah's 11th birthday, Diane died of cancer in her mid-50s. Michael was left to raise Sarah alone in their grief, as the elder 4 siblings had left their Toronto home. This shared experience seems to have made father and daughter very close. However, their lack of physical resemblance grew into a family joke, until Diane's children gradually became aware that this story was not a fiction. Sarah was devastated to the point of illness when she learned the truth of her parentage at 28, on the cusp of an Oscar nomination for her directorial debut. But this documentary doesn't dwell on Sarah's response. Rather, it's a series of interviews with her siblings, fathers, and other relatives and friends, interwoven with real and reenacted footage of the past, and footage of setting up the interviews. All this is overlaid with Michael's own narration of past events, directed in his reading by his daughter. The storytellers agree and conflict. One person claims that the true story can only be told by them, and that others don't have the right to tell it. While these stories help to bring Diane into focus, she remains as fuzzy as Sarah's childhood memories of her mother. In many ways, you have to develop your own understanding of who Diane was and what happened all those years ago. Now, just a spoiler alert, I don't see how we can talk about this 2012 documentary without revealing some of the key details. So, dear listener, you may want to pause this podcast before we discuss this final documentary until you've had a chance to watch it for yourself. But Ricardo, carefully, what did you think?
I knew nothing about Stories We Tell, so when I watched it, I didn't read about it at all. So I watched it with fresh eyes. I began the film thinking, what's going to surprise me here? Okay, from the opening where all of the interviewees, all the family members are shocked that they have to tell the whole story, because they know that it's going to be a long one. I was really eager to hear of the events that happened. And it didn't disappoint. Okay, it's a really heartfelt, emotionally challenging work. And you talk about voyeuristic. I felt that in this film. I felt, I think one of the sister says at the beginning, I just don't know, why anybody would really care about our family. Yeah. From that moment, I was like, we are entering into a personal journey here. Sarah Polley really keeps it together throughout the film, and I was left feeling that the film was more like a sort of therapy for her to get the whole sort of picture of what happened from everybody and the whole story from everybody. It is a deeply personal work. It's very good, and it's very surprising to have that thrust upon you, and specifically for the father as well, for Michael. I really felt for him because it really does bring you in at the very opening to when Diane does pass away and he's left with her, and the fact that they had such a lovely relationship. There's a very strong sense that everybody still misses her 20 years later, more than 20 years later. Yeah. Friends, family, children, partners. They make note that they feel that Diana and Michael were quite opposites. And he makes the point that, I think she fell in love with me as the character in the play. Interestingly, the man who turns out to be Sarah's father, that's how he first encountered Diane. He saw her in a play and was attracted to her. You're right. And that was I like the to and fro. You're thinking it was Jeff Bowles. You're thinking this is, she had that affair. One of the actors. She goes to do a play in Toronto, and I think it sparks her enthusiasm for theatre again. I don't think things were great back in Montreal. And so she decides to go to Toronto and do a play, which gets her enthused again about performance, about acting. And apparently she's a very bubbly personality. And apparently those Super 8 footage and whatnot were reenacted. There was an actress playing her. And I had no idea until the very end. An actress who actually knew her in real life. I had no idea about that, actually. And I was quite surprised. I thought I was watching real footage a lot of the time. And when I saw the cast at the end playing the character, I went, what? Because I was thinking throughout the film, jeepers, they took a lot of Super 8 footage at that time. But I was thinking, they're actors, they said they bought the camera they did. On their honeymoon, was it? Michael says he bought it and he couldn't take his hand off it. I had a similar response. I thought it was all genuine, and I was thinking, there's quite a bit captured here. Yeah. And then there were things I was thinking, they captured that? Like there were family meals talking, and that made sense, and playing in the snow, and some of it
was, I think, real family footage, like father and daughter and the snowman.
But it was seamless.
And the guy they cast as Sarah Polly's dad...
Yeah.
I still find it hard to believe that was an actor, because he looks so much
alike.
And that, for me, the illusion continued that this was all real. And then it started not to make sense. And I worked it out before we got to the end titles. I was thinking, no, hang on a second. And the mother looks different a couple of times, like they were very similar.
Yeah.
But things started to jar. And then at one point I realised, oh, this is not real. This is reenacted. And I felt a bit betrayed by the memories. And I thought, is that deliberate? That the truth seems to be one thing, and here's the stories, and then you realise the truth is something else. And again, I don't want to overinterpret, but I found that a very interesting thing, because it was so well done. And then at some point the penny drops and you go, oh, that's not them.
Yeah, I only found out afterwards when I was looking at the credits, to tell you the truth. So I thought it was real the whole way through, up until then.
I want to circle back. So I had not seen this film before. I'd heard of it, and I suggested this film because I'd heard it was very good, and it was a very personal film, as you say. I knew the bare outlines, which was it's an actress going back to look at her childhood and about who her father might really be. That's all I knew about it. When it started, and like you, I latched on to that comment of the sister about, who'd be interested in a story about us? And one of the things that really struck me about the film is there's all sorts of layers of stuff going on. And in fact, I think I counted, you told the story 3 times. So the first pass through is kind of the surface story about who Mum was, lit up the room. We weren't sure if Mike was really Sarah's dad. And when, in that first pass through, I was thinking, I don't know, I'm actually going to like this film. I was thinking, look, it's okay, it's interesting, but... Yeah. And then you circle back as the audience of the film, and then you get the next level of meaning, which is about, okay, so here's what these people thought was going on. Then I met my real dad, and I had this response. Then you hear the story about the journalist contacting her at one point and absolutely devastating her, that we know the story and want to go public, but her dad...
her dad didn't know.
Michael, the actor, didn't know about it. And so you hear this story again with all these other elements on it. And again, it doesn't particularly dwell on her, but the story about her getting the phone call from the journalist and her response to that. So she's making a film. She's dressed as a cave woman with the prosthetic forehead and so on. Yeah. She gets the call. She goes out to a park. She breaks down in tears. People are looking at her and she doesn't realise it's because there's a cave woman crying in a park, which is a little bit funny in the middle of a very emotional story. And there might have been another pass through, but I said to you, I saw this film first, and I said to you, make sure you watch the little bit that pops up in the credits. So, folks, you see the whole film. It goes about an hour and 3/4, I think.
No, yeah, it is quite a long film. It is quite a long film. I think
but it's compelling.
Yeah, it's compelling.
And then you get the start of the titles. Then you get this little snippet, and then you get the full titles at the end. Now, if you haven't seen this is the spoiler alert. If you haven't seen this film, you might want to stop and come back to us.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Here's your moment. Now, for those of you who are left, I have a theory about this film.
Yeah.
One thing that really struck me, I'm going to watch this film again. I just know it. I really like this film. And the title is so appropriate to this film. The stories we tell, and as you watch the film, you realise the stories that we don't tell as well.
Yeah, well,
and
I think
stories
it's like secrets and lies.
Yeah. But I have a theory about what's going on in this film. And I'm prepared to be wrong because now I'm interpreting a story. Yeah. I think that Sarah is very angry with her biological father, Harry. She never says who told the journo the story. Harry is so delighted to find he's got this adult daughter who's a filmmaker like him.
Yes.
He's a film producer.
Yeah.
He wants to claim her. He wants to claim the story of the mother.
He does want to claim the story.
He wants to tell the story. And then the story comes out and she has no control over it. It's a very emotional event for her. Someone leaked the story, and my money's on Harry, basically. And then so she's put into a position where she's forced to go and tell her father, Michael, the man she grew up believing to be her birth father, the man who raised her and raised her in very trying circumstances at the early death of her mother, and just the two of them. And he's managing his own grief.
That's right.
And a daughter on the cusp of puberty. When you want your mum around. I would imagine, not actually being a girl. She's forced to tell them the story, and in fact, that becomes a lovely moment between the two of them.
It is, yeah.
And Harry is trying to claim the story of, I was Diane's one true love. If it wasn't for the baby, and if it wasn't for the experiences in her first marriage, where She was the first Canadian woman to lose custody of her children, the two eldest children, which had obviously sensitised her to what a great loss that can be from direct experience. That he wants to claim the story of, she would have been mine, this would have been my story, Sarah would have been my child if not for these things, but I was the great love. But he's just another interviewee in the story. The emotional heart of the story, apart from Sarah herself, is Michael. Michael tells the story.
He does.
She's directing him. She's getting him to restate some lines.
She gets him to do it because to her, he's her real father.
And then you finish the film, the credits start, and then you get this little 15-second vignette where another, the Jeff actor
Bowles,
character says, the real actor who was in this production says, well, yeah, actually I slept with her too.
Yep.
Once he realises that he's clear of the charge of paternity.
That's right.
And she knows there's something else to his story.
Yeah,
she comments
she
on
does.
that. But he finally says that. But the fact that Sarah Polley, picks that up and inserts it into the credits. So really, you've heard the whole story, the story's finished, and then suddenly, oh, but wait, there's more. Mm-hmm. And that little moment just stands out so much. I think she's raising her finger to Harry. Harry, you can claim the story about the great love of her life was you, but you weren't the only guy she was on with back in the day.
Yeah.
I think she's having a go at him. I think she's very unhappy about what he tried to do and the story he was trying to tell.
Oh, I think she was
as
completely
the only story.
Unhappy. Yeah, completely
And he's
unhappy.
saying, no one else can tell the story. He's the one who's saying, this is my story, only Diane and I can tell it. She's gone, so it has to be me.
She gives it to Michael. He's the one telling it.
Yes.
And deservedly so, because biological father or not, he raised her.
Yeah.
And so he is her father. And Harry could play whatever he wanted to, and now suddenly I'm your father sort of thing. And it's interesting. I mean, I could never think about being thrust into that scenario where suddenly you have another family. And suddenly, there was one moment in there where she said, I've got Passover. I can't believe I'm actually saying that, because suddenly it's
so foreign.
And I thought, wow, suddenly she's thrust into this new world and suddenly they're family and suddenly it's blood. That'd be a hard situation. But I think she handles herself so well throughout this movie.
Her mother's friends are all dropping hints like crazy. So they're all saying, there's this guy, Jeff, who was in the show.
Yeah. You
should go and talk to him. So as she starts to realise that maybe Michael's not her dad, she thinks it's Jeff.
Yeah.
And then when she's made this film, which I've got to sit down and watch because I hear it's wonderful, Away From Her, starring Julie Christie. So Sarah Polley gets nominated for Best Director at the Oscars. Julie Christie gets nominated for Best Actress. So this is a lot of stuff going on. She goes to Montreal and someone says, oh, you should look up Harry, who knew your mum as well. So she's talking to him. They're going really well. They've got a lot of common interests. And she wants to find out the truth about Jeff. So she asks him, and he says, well, no, actually, it's me. And then they get the DNA test later on, and yes, it's Harry.
Yeah.
But at the time, apparently, it's not in the film.
That was a shock for me.
Well, she was a huge shock for her. So she took to bed for 2 weeks. She was really unwell, while all the stress, I would imagine, of the Oscars is going on. But she gets through that, and she starts to build a relationship with Harry. But then, and I hope I'm not being unfair on Harry. I don't know Harry. I'm not part of the story. I'm now telling the story myself and reading things into it that may or may not be there. But Harry, I reckon, does the journo thing and brings a whole lot more stress into her life. And I just think...
Well, it makes sense a bit. He's a producer and who sees a great story and wants it told. In Harry's defence there, I can see why he would want to tell it. Okay, because it is a great story. And
but with permission.
With permission,
and that's where
of course.
He doesn't...
Yeah, exactly.
If we're right.
Yeah, that's right. So I don't think he's a bad person as such. I just think that's the way he is. I just think he is a producer and likes to tell stories. And I think he's quite surprised that Sarah didn't want to tell that story.
Yeah, he didn't check.
Yeah.
If we're right, and we have to keep saying that, I think, because we're reading stuff into this story.
We are, and I think it's a film. It's been made. We're watching it. People are going to read into it.
Sarah Polley makes a very interesting comment. I think during the film, she says, "I had been wondering in my own life what was real and what wasn't, and I wanted people to have the same question in their minds." And I think she does that very successfully. And if I walk away with one word to capture what I think this film is like, it's layers. So that, as I was saying before, the first time you go through the story, you're not actually told that Diane was married twice. So it's a family of four, and this, mum died. She was this kind of person. She died. That was a big event for us. And then you go back and you hear the story again. Now you start to get some of the nuances. So you go to the next layer of the story. So mum was married before. The first two children were born from that marriage.
Yes.
And it was a terrible event for her because she was the first Canadian woman publicly shamed in the papers who lost her children.
Yeah.
And then you start to hear the story about, well, maybe Michael is not my dad. And then you start to hear the stories about how the elder brother heard the mother talking on the phone.
On the phone, yeah.
You hear Michael talking about how Diane was not happy about the pregnancy and at one stage got very close to having an abortion. And then you hear about, was it Jeff or not? And I think at that stage you hear about Harriet. And then you go back and you start hearing more. Like, it's layer upon layer.
It is layer. It
and
is.
There are layers of meaning in terms of the, is the home movie footage real or not? And there are 3 distinct layers of the film. So you get the supposed home movie footage. You get the footage of the people being interviewed for the documentary and Michael, the dad, reading out his script in the recording booth while Sarah's directing and listening. But you also get this layer that says, we are making a documentary here. So you see footage of people sitting down, putting the microphones on, of lights being set up around them and those big white reflecting panels, whatever you really call them. She's showing layers of meaning in the film as well. I just think it's so skillfully done.
It is. I think it drags a tiny bit at the end when the father's telling the story a little bit. But overall, it is really enthralling. It puts little questions from the very beginning.
Yes.
And he just keeps asking them and you keep wanting to know the answer to what's happened. And I think by the end of it, I felt the most for Michael and what he went through in finding that out.
I would say Michael and Sarah.
And, of course, and Sarah. I think I've made clear that.
Also, there's obviously a very close relationship between the siblings and between Sarah and Michael. I didn't get as a strong feeling about Michael and the other children.
Again, I find it really weird talking about this because I feel it is such a personal story. I feel it does make me feel a little bit weird talking about another person's family. Yeah, it's so personal, this movie. Yeah.
It is, but at one point, about halfway through the film, one of them says, you know what? When this story came out, that affected all of us. So the 3 daughters, including Sarah, all got divorces.
Yeah,
and they're all saying,
which was very interesting.
And they're laughing about it, but again, it's like the family joke that's got a meaning behind it. The elder son, who, like his mother Diane, is a casting director. I can't remember what he said about himself. That he changed relationships, but he says that the other brother, who I think is a lawyer, he actually went in the opposite direction. It made him focus much more on his family, his wife, and I think his 2 children.
Yeah, that's right.
So they all respond to this. It is a very personal story, and I really liked there was a sequence towards the end where Sarah Polley just puts together a series of shots of the interviewees just sitting there and reflecting, and not just her family, but I think 3 of her mother's friends just sitting there and they're kind of staring into space or they're a bit weepy. And again, this sense of Diane was such a vivid character and she's still missed, but her actions have consequences down the years. But my only critique of the film is that I think Sarah hides herself a bit in the film. I mean, she is absolutely one of the central characters in the story, and the film is her trying to make sense of what happened and about the ambiguity when there are different stories told by different people.
Yeah, I think that's on purpose.
She really reveals herself, I think, in the cave woman crying in the park story.
Yeah, she does, but she's getting revealed through everybody else.
Well, I think a lot of it's still so raw for her.
It is, and I think everybody else is talking about it and revealing. You can see who she is. You can see her there. There's no real need for her to say too much in it.
Apparently, she made this film over a number of, sort of bouts over a period of time where she really didn't know if she could finish it. And what got her over the line was she was inclined not to finish it. But then she got funding from, I think it was the National Film Board of Canada. And so then she was compelled to finish. Yeah, she just didn't know that she could go the distance.
Yeah, right.
I love this film. And for me, score-wise, it's a 9. When I finished watching it, I don't know it would have been quite as high a rating. But the next 48 hours, I went away and I just kept thinking about it and thinking about it.
Which is the sign
thinking
of it.
about the story, about what was going on. Feeling like I needed to watch it again. I've loaned this film to 2 people in the 3 days since I watched it through work, saying, you've got to watch this film, it's really interesting and here's why. It might even nudge towards a 10, but it's a solid 9 for me. What about you?
I'm giving it a 7.
Yeah?
Yeah, I don't think I'd be compelled to say I've got to see that story again. I think I've entered into those lives once and heard the story, and that's enough for me. So, I think a 7.
I'm back to the concept of layers. I feel like I've had my first pass through the film. I've heard the story, I've heard the different layers of the story, and now I want to go back and I want to watch it again and look at, from the beginning, at how she told the story. I picked up on the way through, but I really want to go and see it again and just see how that works and what she's done. And I want to go and see Away from Her. I'd like to see that.
I actually do want to see that as well. Yeah, I do. So that concludes episode 7 of the Filmmaker Film Watcher podcast for season 2.
What's Up Documentary?
Oh, What's Up Documentary. Next time, for our next episode, we're going to be looking at epic films. Epic films. So we're going to be looking at, again, 3 films. We're going to be looking at classic, epic Gone with the Wind. Then we're going to be looking at Dr. Zhivago, which is the David Lean classic. And then thirdly, a more recent epic, well, more recent in the last 20 years really for us, is The English Patient.
Now, you and I have both seen The English Patient.
Yes.
You've never seen Gone with the Wind.
I've never seen it.
And I've never seen Dr. Zhivago, which I think I know you love. You know, it's just struck me we're going to be talking about 3 epic films that in terms of their settings are pretty much the last 150 years. We're not going further back, but... You know, if our audience wants to turn up to listen to that episode, you know, wearing their sword and sandals, that's entirely up to them. Well, we won't be. At least I hope we're not going to be.
I really think there's a silent movie episode in there to look at something like Intolerance, which is D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, which from 1915.
I know you're a huge fan of.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So, but that's for another episode. But for this epic film...
no sword, no sandals. It'll just be epic.
Epic. Till next time.
See ya.